I believe we're going to get started again. If you can grab your coffee and take a seat. My name is Blake Conzel, and I'm the Executive Director for the Fresno Regional Workforce Development Board. I'm happy to be here today to act as moderator for Panel 1 on Thursday, entitled Valley Assets and Innovation for a Sustainable Workforce, Building on Our Strengths. And I'm joined today by Jim Mayer, the Chief Executive Officer from California Forward, who we heard earlier, by John Miller, the Senior Vice President for McPherson Energy. And then in your program, David Lanier, the Secretary of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, has the flu, but luckily his understudy is Tim Rainey, who is the Executive Director of the State of California Workforce Development Board. And then last but not least, Catherine Sandoval, who's a commissioner with the California Public Utilities Commission. So a really powerhouse panel to talk on this topic. In just some brief opening remarks, and Stuart emphasized the word brief, in Mr. Mayer's earlier talk, so many things jumped off his slides to me, but when he made the statement that the solution to the issues we're talking about is more than just more money, I can tell you that in the Valley, in Fresno County particularly, but in the 8 counties of the Valley in which we as a workforce board are involved in numerous grants, that is absolutely the issue. It is not a question of more resources. It is a question of how the resources we have are better orchestrated to meet employer needs. And for those of us in the workforce world, the relationship that we have with our local community colleges, both West Hills and State Center District, with Fresno State, I know Fresno State's also in the audience, but also for our sister WIBs in the Valley, how we interface with public education and how we both can work to make sure that the resources that we receive from the U.S. Department of Labor and from the governor, and that you all receive from the Department of Education, other funding sources, how they can actually meet employer needs. That is the crux of the solution of a lot of issues. The other thing, too, that leaped off the page, and I wanted to say it, is he talked about siloed programs and siloed thinking. I've been in Fresno now for 15 years, not from the Valley originally, and I married a native, and she said we're staying, so I guess I'm here for the duration. But when I first came to Fresno, I joked with somebody that after getting used to working in local government within our county, that I wanted to write a book, and I was going to entitle it City of Silos. Because it's very easy to begin thinking that your only responsibility is to your funding stream, and that's true. As an example, our office receives funding from the U.S. Department of Labor, and there are certain things that I must deliver back to the Department of Labor if I want to keep my office open and if I want to keep my job. The thing is that those requirements are a floor. They're the beginning point of a conversation. And what ends up happening in many bureaucracies is that the deliverables that you have to give to your funding source end up becoming a ceiling where you stop. And so I'm eager to hear what our panelists have to say today on this topic, and I'm sure we're all going to be informed, and hopefully you all will have lots of great questions during their presentations and afterwards. So I will call up first Jim Mayer, Chief Executive Officer for California Forward.
So good morning again. You know what I want to do for those of you who were here yesterday to remind you of some of the comments that we got from the alumni of this college and active professionals now in agricultural sustainability, and for those of you who weren't here to be able to capture a few of those threads. It was really a great panel, right? These are young people out there on the cutting edge of agriculture and on the use of agriculture, of technology, and I was really inspired by a couple of their sound bites. And so one of the young men was Andrew Finster, and these were a couple of his comments. Andrew said, "Any good farmer is a micromanager." Think how counterintuitive that is. He said, "I want to be the best I can be, and I want to replace the human hand." Thinking about technology and how it would transform what it is he did. And then I was really struck by this. He was talking about moisture probes that were automated, and you could sit on your tractor in your office or in your F-350 and figure out where you were under irrigating. And he said sometimes you have to do it the old-fashioned way. You have to get out there with a moisture probe. And I turned to the dean from Reedley College, and we both looked at each other and said, we still use shovels. Right? So this guy was, sometimes you got to get out of your pickup, you got to get out of your office and go out and use a motion probe. Brent McKenzie says, and I love this quote, farmers are the original sustainers. And then at one point, they were all looking across each other and said, we're all specialists, right? Well, they're all hyper specialists, right? They're all in the field of agriculture, but we can't get anything done without working to each other. Imagine being in your early 20s and realizing you can't get anything done without working with each other. They're so far ahead of where we were. And Carrie Birdwell, she said, the only thing we know for sure about farming is that something's going to break. And you have to be prepared to fix it. So let's, with their spirit, can you hand me that clicker? I'm just going to walk you through a couple of slides here. And so this is the title of our conversation here this morning, Valley Assets and Innovation for a Sustainable Workforce, Building on Our Strengths. And it's certainly a strength-based title. And so Valley Assets, I thought I just would take each one of these portions of that title and offer just a couple of thoughts for our conversation. And some of these are things we talked about yesterday and that we've talked about in other essential elements. So while it's repetitive, I think it's important to stay grounded in what we know and what is true, because we're only going to build on what we know and what is true. We have very engaged employers in the San Joaquin Valley, and it's not just in ag. And there's some uniqueness around the relationship between ag and their communities, but it's not just ag. That is a huge, huge asset, and it's one that needs to be nurtured with more care than we nurture our 401ks. They are critical to not only that pipeline we're trying to create, and we touched on apprenticeships and other things yesterday that were more than curriculum and classes that really create that, and they're also key on product improvement. And we oftentimes lack the capacity or the culture within the public sector to do continuous improvement. There isn't any business that's been alive for longer than 5 years that hasn't figured out they've got to be involved in continuous improvement. So that's a part for partnership. You have a production economy. It's so painfully obvious, it's in the air. Did you go outside this morning? But you have a production economy, and many places don't. And what that really means is you're dealing with necessities, and you've got economic multipliers that lots and lots and lots of other regions don't have. So build like crazy on that, right? That's a tremendous thing. Obvious, but not to be forgotten. You have emerging collaboration. It's not everywhere, but it's significant. And as we've been talking about yesterday, we'll talk about more here, particularly in this area of workforce, which is a fancy bureaucratic word for people. Collaboration is required to grow, nurture, support, and they're all place-based relationships, which are critical because they're both place-based and their relationships. And you have effective civic intermediaries, right? The role here of social sector agencies isn't to just do good, but it's to be that intermediary between business, very, very busy employers and business folks and public institutions, and between those two partnerships and the public and community at large. So think about your social sector as civic intermediaries that help you have efficient relationships. And they're essential to really high value collaborations. So those are some of your Valley assets. What about some Valley innovation? Well, you have converging projects, and all you have to do is follow what we've been doing here over the last couple of years. Water, energy, technology, these are not different things. These are increasingly all in one. And all around agriculture and global production, as well as energy and global production. And the technology is both the solution and the product, and it's the means. And the more we understand how those things are converging, the more we will be able to innovate. We have an integration of capital, and by that I mean both human, financial, and natural resources. That doesn't occur everywhere. That's a very, very, very strong alignment. And so how do you make the most out of that as an innovation? And not just an asset, but as a place to create new product, new value, new efficiency, things that are exportable, and things that bring value. And then what I see, and probably what we need to do more of, and we'll have to do more of, is interregional partnerships. So much of this is about owning your own region and taking care of your own region. But anybody who goes to the far north and you see what happens on 205 and 580 every day, you understand you're already connected in ways. So I know that there's efforts within this valley, deliberate conversations going on with Silicon Valley about how not to put their back offices in Mumbai, and not even to put them in Texas, but to put them in the San Joaquin Valley. And so not all of these interrelationships are going to have to be, should be, can be around agriculture, but some of them can be. And you start building those relationships between people, regardless of the businesses they're in, and you're going to find out that there's all kinds of ways to marry the technology. So it is about bringing some of those tech startups here to do ag tech, but it's also about finding other ways to connect production stages. So those are some Valley innovations. So what are some themes around sustainable workforce you might want to think about? And these get a little bit integrated, but that's, I think, the value of it. So pathways that end in employment, and this is one more bullet after which you could say, duh. But what we know by looking at the spending, even just across all of the CTE, not all of it is actually aligned with places where there is job growth. There's places through the CTE pipelines statewide where we have oversupply. I've heard CEOs of colleges candidly say the only thing harder than starting a new CTE program is killing one that we no longer need. And that tells you something, right? So how over time do we continue to line up? And this requires collaboration with employers, not only to make sure we're getting the right skill sets, the right curriculum, the right program, the right apprenticeships, the right soft skills. And we got to recognize that from an institutional standpoint, workforce development doesn't end with a certificate. It ends with a job in the field in which you were trained, and increasing salaries. That's the metric that's actually in the Strong Workforce Program. And this contributes to that cycle, because if employers are helping you create that, they're going to help you improve it, and they're going to help you build it. This durable relationship across the sectors. I talked about that in terms of the Economic Summit. It just does not happen without those kinds of collaborations between public, private, and civic. And it's not just about curriculum and hiring practices. If you create the relationships around that pipeline, you're going to create relationships that are going to solve all of the other issues, the regulatory issues, the access to capital, the political problems with other local government agencies or even state agencies that maybe have determined that the day for agriculture in California is past. It's operationally and politically essential to have these durable relationships across the sector. And again, I want to encourage that in workforce, it's easy to think about a single bottom line. What are we doing for the students? That's incredibly important. But if we think about it in terms of the triple bottom line, we'll actually get where we need to be. And it will connect with the other tech sectors, the production stages, and the markets that we need in order to make sure that there's more jobs on the end of that pipeline. Remember, we have a job deficit in California, and we need to be very, very deliberate through the workforce pathway to do everything we can to nurture and create more jobs. And then finally, building on strengths. What can you do? Integrate. So then, to maybe integrate a couple of these points. How do we figure out how not just to innovate within the workforce pipeline and the silo, but how do we integrate with those other economic development strategies that are there? We've been doing some meetings around the state trying to make sure people understand on the local government and the business side the Strong Workforce Program. And we've had in many large cities, the economic development directors from large cities come to those meetings and say, the strong what? Right? And so they're the local governments in charge of trying to attract cities. And in one meeting down in the Inland Empire, we had an economic development director and the mayor of a city saying that they lost jobs because the people were making workforce demands on them and they didn't know who to turn to. So we need to figure out how to integrate our workforce and our other, both innovation and economic developments. And I started with some thoughts from our millennials. Boy, oh boy, I just think increasingly we find ways to integrate them in the problem solving and solution set. They were thinking about it in ways that are ahead of where many of us are. And it turns out that the people, the products of our workforce development may be the saviors of our workforce development. So there was some conversation yesterday around the brain drain, and that's been a recurring theme through virtually every conversation in the Valley, not just the Essential Element series. So it made me start thinking, especially after going to the Farm of the Future yesterday, that how do we reverse that? This isn't just about keeping talent in the Valley. This is about making the Valley a place where people come to grow their talents. If you read about innovation economies, one of that great magic dynamics you're trying to create is it attracts talent. That's what's going on in the Silicon Valley. People are coming from all over the globe to work in the Silicon Valley. It's what's driving up housing prices and everything else. How do we create that dynamic around tech innovation where if you actually want to learn how to do it, this is the place you come? And it's not just about getting enough kids from the Valley into the Farm to the Future, but creating that as a place where people from other places are coming to do here. I don't think we have anything to be worried about by sharing and growing talent. I think we figure out how to reverse the brain drain. And then this was a theme that came up yesterday, but again, it's maybe obvious, but should not be forgotten, and it might even be one of our taglines. This isn't about agriculture. This is the culture of ag. This is that can-do spirit, that stewardship, that integrated, that long-term, and we've got to find a way to make sure that that's deliberately spread through all of our industry clusters, all of our approaches, because not only is it contagious, but it's really essential. And as one of our millennials told us, farmers are the original sustainers. Thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm John Miller from McPherson Energy. I wanted to first thank you all for the invitation to talk here this morning. We've got, what I wanted to do is tell you what McPherson Energy is all about. And given what I've heard here this morning and late yesterday, talk a little bit about where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. We've got some good policy level ideas that we've talked about, a very impressive tour of the facilities at West Hills yesterday. I'd like to have you take my comments as those that coming from somebody where we are hiring and we're trying to figure out the right kinds of people to attract to our business. Let me just quickly tell you about McPherson. We've operated oil production in Kern County since 1973. Don McPherson Sr. had the idea that you could take some of the older oil fields that had already been primary pumped, as we call them, and with new technology, extract more oil out of those fields. So he and his son started buying that up. One of the technologies that was created was the steaming of the fields. And in the mid-'80s, McPherson combined with Bechtel and Pacific Core and other major people involved in the cogeneration field in those days, and built one of the first clean coal demonstration plants in California, operated for 20 years under a power purchase agreement with PG&E. In the mid-'90s, McPherson had developed a steaming technology to the point where they bought a number of fields. They recognized that steaming was a field-wide issue. It wasn't something you could just put down into one particular area of the field with a bunch of vertical wells. Bought up what's called the Round Mountain unit and increased the production in that pretty much older and spent field by about 10 times. Here's one of the ways that was done. Horizontal drilling absolutely revolutionized things in the 2000s, brought California as a whole back as one of the major oil producers in the United States. That first power plant that was built in the mid-'80s in 2011 was converted to a biomass-powered plant. It burns about 1,000 tons a day of agricultural waste and clean construction waste, and is operating today under a 15-year contract with PG&E. We're now into the third generation of McPhersons. The grandchildren of Don McPherson Sr. are coming into the company, and the energy business is the business that we're in, and so we're now designing a solar field that will run about 300 of our what we call pump jacks. So you're seeing the integration of the energy business from oil to renewables and into the new technologies. While all this was going on, there were dramatic changes in the energy business. We've talked about enhanced oil recovery and horizontal drilling. In the electric generation field, in the last 25 years, there's been huge changes in terms of where the generation comes from. Deregulation has moved incrementally in a direction where a lot of options have come into play. Wind and solar and biomass are all pretty much a result of that. From a company standpoint, strategically, we believe that the locational opportunities that we have are important. Knowing the regulatory system in California is actually a competitive advantage for us. Producing energy close to our customers is important to us. So it is, while there are regulatory challenges here, and I could, as I've cautioned somebody this morning, I might go down a rabbit hole if I mention the word, but there's a lot going on here that is difficult to deal with, but is also, if we're going to operate in this environment, We need to be able to handle those issues. This is my favorite slide of all time, and I'm just going to spend 30 seconds on it. I carry it with me on the airplane when I don't want to think about anything else. On one side, on your left-hand side, are all of the sources of energy that are out in the U.S. On the right-hand side, as you look at it, are the uses in the pink boxes. And in the middle is all the various pathways from one to the other. The point of putting this slide up is two things. One is, as ag and water and energy all come together, there is a lot of opportunity for improvement. That is pointed out especially when you look at the gray box and the black box on the right-hand side as you look at it, and you see that 60% of the energy that we take out of our fuels is still not being used productively. Huge upside opportunity there. Look this up. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories has this on their website under energy flows. Look it up. It's a lot of fun to think about. Okay, now to the subject at hand, our workforce characteristics. So what are we looking for? When we're thinking about what's going on in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years with our workforce, and we're thinking about oil fields that are depleting, that new technology is making other fields productive, so we have a balance going on. We're a net increaser of oil resources in the state right now. We are broadening our energy production into other areas. What kinds of things are we looking at? Well, the point number one there, offices have moved from managing information to analytics. Information flow over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years has all been digitized. Coming out of the Great Recession, everything, time cards, invoices, everything is digitized. So we don't have people that do hands-on information gathering in our company anymore. The technology advantages are enabling step changes. We are gathering information from the field with all kinds of various items. One of the classic examples is, in terms of looking at technology, we used to have electricians who needed to take care of black, white, and neutral. Now, practically every device they install has an IP address. It's a whole different area out there. The people, point number 3, the nature of the work has changed. Roughnecks, shift workers, accounts payable, those are almost jobs of the past in our business. We have safe and reliable technicians that understand regulations, that understand safety. I was delighted with your comments last night about how important it is in your operation here. That is absolutely a must when people come into our organization. So, and the last point is all about communication. I think the best way to summarize that is we need people who understand how to communicate with each other, how to communicate with management, how to write and speak and get a point across. So when we look at this, what are the impacts on education? I've mentioned this, but I'm going to stay on it for another few seconds. This, whether it's in the field or it's in the office or it's in a training session, the understanding of the environment that we operate in the rules and regulations that we operate in, is just absolutely a must. People have to have empathy for each other. They have to have an understanding of the mission and know that mission needs to be accomplished safely and in a regulatory responsible manner. Technical skills. We see coming out of the schools people that have good understanding of how to wire, account, and do things, but not a lot of experience in problem solving. If the problem isn't pretty obvious, they can put their skills to use on something if they understand that it's just wiring that device. But if there's some confusion on what device it is, people get stuck there. And so we see a need for more problem solving in the basic educational system. Interpersonal skills absolutely have gone I won't say south or downhill, that's an overstatement, but they are tending downward instead of the other way. It's all about the way people have grown up and all of the tools that they have at hand right now. But the ability to interact with each other, to carry on a conversation where one person speaks and the other person listens and then respond, to do that in a group of 4 or 5 is very important. So we've gone to a much more of a team interview kind of a situation to see how people can deal with that. And the last point, continuous learning. Every job, we think, is going to change again in 5 years. So that guy from John Deere last night was absolutely perfect. But he is the exception right now, not the rule. People are coming out of school and they're thinking, I can do this for my career, I can stay pretty close to this. I think, our view is that, and we're looking for people that come out and think, I'm going to do this for a few years, I'm going to learn something else. I know that my skill is going to be automated, outsourced. We've got all kinds of technology developing right now that is going to change everything again. That concludes my comments. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take questions later on.
Good morning. I'll try to be brief because I know you guys want to get your questions out and answered. At least we'll try to answer them. I want to start, though, by thanking Chancellor Gornick for having me here. I'm here on behalf of David Lanier, who's the Secretary of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency in Sacramento. So I jumped in a car this morning at, I don't know what the hell time it was, 5 o'clock, and drank 6 gallons of coffee on the way, which is both making me shake and want to go to the bathroom at the same time, so forgive me if I look fidgety. I also want to thank President Van Horn. We tried to get out here last year and botched it all up, so I'm really honored to finally be able to make it. I don't know where Kalinga is, actually. I just know there's a sign by the freeway, so after this is over, I'm going to go find it. Is it on this side of the freeway or is it on the other side of the freeway? Hell, what is that, north? That's okay, west. All right, cool. I don't know where it. I got turned around walking in. We'll drive you over there. All right, thanks, Stu. Yeah, fair enough. Thank you. How many folks in the room are from community colleges? Right on. So CTE instructors, deans, sector navigators, deputy sector navigators. Did I get it right? Anything else? Any of you sit on local workforce boards? All right, cool. I'm sorry. My condolences. No, I'm just kidding, Blake. We're doing a great deal of work in Sacramento to make those things very much aligned. How many folks actually thought, our patrons here at the hotel, thought this was the free continental breakfast and wandered in and found this conversation so riveting you couldn't tear yourself away? Liars. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit about business engagement. On the way up, I was thinking about what to say and writing down various notes, and then changed all that as I listened to these guys talk. A little bit about business engagement, what we're trying to do in Sacramento, and then kind of leave it at that. When I started, in the workforce world, those of us in the workforce world, community college folks, workforce board people, people in community-based organizations who do similar work that we do, but kind of get deeper into the community. K-12, we have a bunch of investments in career pathways in K-12, CTE on both sides. So a lot of folks are out there doing this work. We consider industry engagement the holy grail, do we not? I mean, that's it. If we could just crack the code on business engagement, there's going to be this torrent of fantastic jobs released for the people that we serve and that we need to connect to good jobs. That's kind of the way we see the world. The problem is that we're all out trying to crack the code together, but separately. So there's this kind of increasing number of us out there in the world, because in Sacramento, in our infinite wisdom, we believe that's the way it should go. So every program we create, or every policy we create, we will require a business engagement specialist to also go out there and go after the same employers that everybody else is already trying to talk to. But we don't do it cohesively or as a kind of one voice. We do it separately. So we drive people crazy. There is The state board chair, his name is Mike Rossi, he's a senior jobs advisor for Governor Brown, who appointed me 4 years ago, told me when he first came on, 5 years ago now, God, time flies when you're having fun, 5 years ago, when he started, Mike Rossi, he said to me, don't go out there, because I was raring to go on business engagement. This was the thing I was gonna, crack the code on the Holy Grail. He said, don't go out there and make a bunch of promises to business people that you can't keep. Don't say you're going to do a bunch of things, and then the public sector can't deliver on those things on the business engagement side. He said, get your public sector folks in some kind of order around the state. Get them organized. But also organize the private sector side. And we talk about this as supply and demand. So that's what we set out to do about 5 years ago with Blake's help. Setting out kind of a broad framework for how we could organize the supply side. So we're coming at industry with one voice, but also organizing the demand side, business. Because what we found is that we're constantly trying to get business to sit down at our table. And then we throw a bunch of alphabet soup at them, and then they glaze over, or they leave the workforce board like John did, because they're tired of the alphabet soup. Instead of inviting them to our table and talking to them and listening to what their needs are, let's get to their table. And this is the thing that Rossi kept telling us. Let's get to their table. If they can set the table, and we've seen this happen. I was actually in Beverly Hills, strangely enough. I didn't drive there, I flew there. I do kind of know where it is. It was Linda Resnick from The Wonderful Company. You guys know The Wonderful Company. They've been doing fantastic work on the education side, building pathways, also building roads and community centers and all that. You guys know, you guys work with The Wonderful Company? Anybody in the room? Are you from The Wonderful Company? No. Oh. West Hills? Oh yeah, of course. West, you guys are working. So I'll be careful not to like make up a bunch of shit about The Wonderful Company since you're in the room. Damn, I had a bunch of cool things I was going to say that may or may not be true. Because that's what you do when you stand at a podium. What Linda Resnick was telling us in Beverly Hills, and she had a bunch of her counterparts in the room, not just from agriculture, but from industry leaders, the C-suite folks. They were saying, we don't understand the education and training system. It's too damn complicated, and we've got real jobs, and we don't have time to figure out your Byzantine stuff. What she said to them was, do what I did in the Central Valley. And Wonderful Company's not doing it alone, right? They're now bringing in other big agricultural companies, big technology companies around the Central Valley to also do the work they're doing. They're not sitting back and waiting for you guys to come to them. They're investing their money, but they're also putting to work our money. And what we understand is that if multiple employers inside a sector come together and they tell us what they need together, and they're also bringing their own money to the game, we'll organize around that all day long. We love that because that means that we can put the people we most need to serve to work in their companies. We can put them in as for work experience. We can get them jobs. We can get them career pathways. We can go all the way to K-12 and start lining up career pathways and end up in jobs with these companies. That stuff works, and it's amazing. So what we need to really think about across the state, and this is what we're trying to get at with Slingshot, is how do we organize the demand side? So multiple employers in the manufacturing sector in the East Bay, or agriculture or agricultural technology in the Central Valley, or biotech in the South Bay, or aerospace, I mean, whatever region you're talking about, multiple employers actually getting to the table, deciding what they need, and then telling us what to do. That works. It works in Europe, it'll work here. Why did I say that? There's another added point that I think ties into the Slingshot. I was at a conference in the spring in San Diego. It's California Workforce Association. They do an annual spring conference, and they do one in the fall also, where we, I think, met, crossed paths, John. In Monterey, they call it Meeting the Minds in Monterey, because all the smart people go there in the fall. They invited in April to San Diego the West Sacramento mayor. Anybody go to that conference? Okay, you guys should go. It's really good. Plus, it's in San Diego. The mayor from West Sacramento made the case as eloquently as I've ever heard it made about the importance of regionalism and a common vision. He said, people experience workforce education programs at the local level, and that's good. You have to have those programs operating and are connecting to people in the community directly. So those things operate at the local level. But economies don't organize locally. They don't organize within political jurisdictions, and they don't organize within school districts. They organize regionally. So we've got to figure out ways of coming to a common vision among our different components of the workforce system, embedded in a regional vision for where the region needs to be over the next 5 to 10 years economically and socially. And that conversation of the regional leader needs to be driven by the business leaders in the sectors that are driving regional employment, our education leaders, our labor leaders, workforce board leaders, civic, community-based organizations, elected officials need to be coming up with this common vision at the regional level, and it's going to be different in different parts of the state. And then our programs need to organize and connect to jobs in the industry sectors that are driving regional employment. This is a really tough sell for local elected officials who often think hyper-locally. But if we don't get them to think big that way and see the forest through the trees, we're not going to make this stuff happen because they have a lot of control sometimes over the funding streams that come from Washington and from Sacramento. Speaking of Sacramento, we have a wonderful habit, talking about regulations, of thinking we know everything and creating new programs and layering on a bunch of new requirements, regulations, and then expecting you guys to kind of untangle that when it gets to the local level. So in our infinite wisdom, we make your life harder. We don't mean to do that. We're just stupid. But we're trying not to be that stupid. When we're doing it right, we actually identify the good stuff that's happening locally, like what Stu Van Horn and Blake Consular are doing here. We recognize where the stuff is working right, and then we invest in that. We rally and we organize around the good stuff that's happening already in regions across the state. And then we try to remove the stupid administrative barriers to that work in Sacramento to facilitate the ingenuity and the innovation and the creativity that's going on. And that's what we're trying to do with Slingshot. We've invested $1 million in every region, 12 regions of the state, to pull together that regional leadership, to organize the supply side, organize the demand side, and make that bridge occur. But the biggest part of the Slingshot work, and we've got other investments the same way, is to put the money out there with smart people and smart stuff already happening, get the hell out of the way, and allow the creativity to actually happen, and let you do the work. And then you tell us at meetings like this, which I hope you'll do, tell us what the other stupid stuff we're doing is that we might not have thought about, or we may think it's smart and it's not because it's getting in your way. You tell us, and then we work constantly. This is our commitment back. We work constantly to remove those administrative and policy barriers that are getting in the way. And that's our job in Sacramento. Our job in Sacramento is to hitch our wagon to you, put our monies and our policies in the context of what you're trying to do, big regional stuff, and connecting the programs to where the jobs are, and then remove the obstacles to you getting your work done. That's our job. You guys are looking at me like incredulously. No, you don't. It's aspirational. This is what we want to do. So to kind of finish up, I just want to make a couple of statements about what's in our state strategic plan, because Stu kind of asked me to do this. In Sacramento, when we started this process of developing our state strategic plan, we needed ourselves kind of an organizing principle or something, a North Star, to start kind of understanding how to implement policy and spend money and direct our dollars. So we came up with, it was kind of part of the Slingshot thinking that was before our state strategic plan had to be developed. But the first one was income mobility. So at state level, Vonton Quinlivan, me, the folks at the Department of Education and the Superintendent's Office, GoBiz, the Employment Training Panel, the Division of Apprenticeship Standards, we're all on the same page on we want to move the needle on income mobility. So the ability of somebody to move from the bottom 10% to the top 10% income-wise in his or her lifetime. That's our big, or the bottom 5% to the top 5%. That's kind of our North Star. That's our organizing principle. From there, we developed some big goals, and there are two, and one was mentioned here. One is to double apprenticeships in the state of California over the next 10 years. And that's going to be actually pretty easy to achieve because we're really on the way of doing that. But we want to focus on industry sectors that are outside construction. We want to look at manufacturing, agriculture, IT, sectors where we don't normally have apprenticeship, because with that direct connection to jobs is exactly what we want to achieve. There's no better model than apprenticeship. So we want to expand apprenticeship and help you do that by, again, putting money out and removing stupid barriers to you getting that done. The second is, as Jim said, a million new industry value credentials over the same period, next 10 years. And the Strong Workforce Program was brilliant, as Jim pointed out, and I think Von Ton-Quinlivan has done a tremendous amount of really smart work in Sacramento. Love us or hate us, we're trying to make that goal achievable by giving you tools that you need to remove the barriers to getting new credential programs to market that really meet businesses' needs, where there is a market, but also looking at which ones aren't working and don't have real value in the labor market and doing what you can to sort of shift resources. That's what the Strong Workforce Program, I think, ultimately is about, and organizing regionally, having those discussions regionally. And then finally, really doubling down on the regional leadership, doubling down on the sector approach and the business engagement, making sure that we can share data across programs so that the system comes together in a more comprehensive way. So it's not just the colleges trying to do soup to nuts by themselves, or the workforce boards trying to do soup to nuts by themselves, but we're really engaging across the different components of the workforce system regionally in some comprehensive way to get scale and greater impact. Because we can do a lot alone, we can change a life, but if we're all together, working with the same goals and the same vision as a real system, we don't just change a life, we can really change communities. Thank you very much.
Well, good morning. My name is Kathy Sandoval. It's so great to be here. It's always great to be back in an area where you say good morning and people say good morning back. So it is always a pleasure to be here at Harris Ranch. This is actually my husband and I, it is one of our favorite places to go. It's his birthday today, and unfortunately he's traveling elsewhere, so we will meet soon in Vegas for his birthday. But he was hoping to be able to come with me here, and I have had the pleasure of being at Coalinga, and have had the pleasure a couple of years ago of being a judge for the first Apps for Ag hackathon that was held at the West Hills Community College. So I can tell you a little bit more about that because you'll be hearing more from me as the luncheon speaker, but just a brief story on that one. So when I think about the themes that we've heard today and, looking at how the future is changing, one of the underlying things that I hear is the importance of IP, the importance of communications, the changing technology. And I think that technology is both an opportunity and frankly a barrier that we need to overcome here. Because as all of you know who work in this beautiful valley, there are many places here that have absolutely no communication. But right before I went to the Apps for Ag hackathon, I had the opportunity to visit with Joe Del Bosque. You may know Joe. He's a farmer who is based out of the Fireball area. And when I went to his office, they had internet, and actually one of his crops that's the most productive is a cell phone tower that's right off of the 5. And he makes a lot of money off of that thing. And so because it's close to his office, he gets pretty good signal in his office. And then we went out to his fields, and one of the things that I would really encourage you to download if you haven't is the CPUC has an app. There's a reason I'm looking at my phone during my presentation, but the CPUC has an app which is called Cal Speed. So it's available as a free download, Cal Speed. And so when you download the app, one of the things that you can do is you can test it. Where is my CalSpeed app? So you can test either the outdoor speed or the indoor speed of your wireless internet connection. And then it also loads the data up to the cloud. And so what it does is it helps us to be able to determine where the gaps are in terms of communications. And this is important because it can also help to steer funding to those areas and tell you a lot about what's going on in terms of what is there and what isn't there. So we found that when we ran the app, as I went with Joe, we jumped in the truck and we went to various fields. There were some of his fields, like his cherry fields, that were not even a mile from the office. Okay, pancake flat land, cherry trees, but not big trees, not pine trees. Any of you who are into communications know pine trees have their own thing in terms of the signal looks a lot like satellite signals. But there was just no communication out there. And any network design would have predicted that there should have been excellent communication, and there was nothing. All right, so getting back to West Hills and the Apps for Ag Hackathon, I had the honor of being the opening keynote speaker for the reception the first night, catered by Harris Ranch, thank you. Was very good food. And one of the things that was really noteworthy about that hackathon is I thought that the way they structured things was just so beautiful. For all of the teams that were going to be developing apps for agriculture, every team had to have a farmer and a coder. So it truly brought together worlds that hardly ever meet, let alone work together collaboratively. And so people came over from the Silicon Valley to participate, as well as from Fresno, because as you know, there is a very large agricultural center in Fresno that is also focused on ag tech. And so we had a number of people there who were farmers, people who were coders, a small cadre of people who had serious overlap of farming and coding. But as I talked to the people and I looked across the room, you could really divide that room into two groups, what I call the cowboy boot people and the tennis shoe people. And so, as I was describing to the tennis shoe people, who were the ones who were new to the area, what they would experience and what they should think about with an app, right? I had to explain to them that, you're going to be developing an app for a phone, right? But you have to remember that if you're developing an app for ag, couple of things you got to know. Okay, if you expect the people to use this app out on the fields, you got to realize in a lot of the fields around here, there is absolutely no communication, right? It's essentially a brick. Now, you may be able to, if you got Deuce, you can store stuff. And then so what you're going to be asking people to do is go to a place in the morning where they have connectivity, go to the fields where you communicate largely by waving your scarf or your hat, right? And then they would go back to a place where they would upload. Okay, the tennis shoe people were like this, right? So, because in the Silicon Valley, no one has to design an app that way. And all the cowboy boot people said, yep. So, because everybody who's around here knows that's exactly what happens, right? And it's not just here, right? I had the opportunity to meet the Kendall Jackson family, and we had a chance to have a meeting at the La Crema winery, which we had because we're very interested. They are real leaders in their use of water, and they had just installed a 1 megawatt solar array on their building, which they were having a hard time getting connected. And when you walk outside the door of La Crema, once again, absolutely no communications. So I mentioned this in terms of themes, and I'll talk about it a little bit more at lunch, because I think this is really one of the backbones to what all of you are talking about, right? To be able to really transform not just this region, but California, making communications more ubiquitous is really what is going to enable those jobs. And until we do that, we're going to have major holes, right? And we better, our hats really aren't going to do it. So another theme I wanted to pick up on was I was intrigued, a lot of you discussed, really, I think, the change in the workers that you're expecting. So one part of it is familiarity with the technology, right? So that you're expecting workers who come in knowledgeable about technology. Some of you mentioned using IP addresses in various parts of technology. I love the moniker, from roughnecks to safe and reliable, right? From roughnecks to rough and ready, right? So, but what you're looking for is also problem solvers and people who do not engage in cookie cutter solutions. So I also have the honor of being a professor. I, like many of you, am an educator. I'm a law professor at Santa Clara University. So I wasn't able to join you last night because I was teaching my contracts class. I teach a night class. And I love the night students, as I know many of you do. So with a lot of the night students, day students are great too. But night students come to us often with more work. All of my students also have jobs, and they're very curious. So one of the biggest challenges I find in terms of helping the students really learn how to think like lawyers is to get over the idea that there is a right answer. This is the toughest challenge that they have, right? They're all so anxious to get to the answer and the right answer that they will skip over a lot of process. They will miss a lot of nuances. They won't ask the right questions. So, I heard a student do this the other day when we were talking about a particular issue related to the statute of frauds, where something that is otherwise an enforceable contract will become unenforceable because it is not in writing. And as we were talking about this issue, the student said, well, if this and that exception applied, then the contract is enforceable, so the contract is enforceable. And I was listening to him thinking, wow, you just leapt tall buildings with a single bound, right? He was also wrong, but that really wasn't the point. The point was that I want them to go through the process. And so I'm really teaching them more than anything to, first of all, start with the question, right? So I teach the Sherlock Holmes method of legal studies, which is the answer is in the question. Right? Can we train our workers to start with the question and to really be open to the question, right? As opposed to thinking that there is a stock answer, that there is a cookie cutter, that there is one way. And when you start with the question, maybe we'll also be more interested in listening. Because I think another theme that we have heard is collaboration. Right? Both collaboration with our fellow workers, collaboration with our communities, collaborations with regions, breaking down barriers between cities, regions, states, federal government, tribes, families, really, truly collaboration, which I believe begins with listening and asking good questions. So with that, I will stop so we can hear your questions. Thank you.